Alright, okay, we can finally start. So thanks for waiting, everyone. Just had a few problems with like getting the right connectors and stuff. So anyway, this is a talk about how I got into security. My name is Grace, and I'm a security engineer. I also do lockpicking and do some watercolor painting as well. In school, biology was actually my best subject. And kind of like my teachers and my friends and stuff expected me to go down that path, but when I kind of thought about what kind of jobs it might lead to, I kind of imagined maybe being stuck in a lab and having to like measure things and count stuff, and I'm really bad at counting. I much prefer it when computers do counting for me. So I really enjoyed technology though. So biology wasn't that convincing, maybe, but I really like playing video games, and I like interaction and stories. I feel like there's a lot of power in good stories, right? So I thought like maybe what I could do is like consider doing computers. And I had a meeting with a careers advisor, and they were like, if there's anything that you could do in the world, what would you want to do? Like invent stuff, but that sounds really hard. And she was like, yes, and? I'm like, oh, I guess maybe I could do the difficult things. I'm not really sure. I was really into like interactive art, and I saw this on that side. I don't know if this is going to work or not. If it doesn't, it's just, there's like no sound. But this is a dance performance that's using like real-time augmented reality, and like these are like drones that they have like synchronized, and it's like really awesome performance that they use like these really cool techniques to do. And I was like, man, this is the kind of stuff that I really want to do. So I started out in design down in Wellington, and I did a coding course as part of that, and I found it really challenging. And I thought, okay, I'm probably going to avoid doing any kind of coding because it's hard, but I really want to create interactive projects and interactive art and maybe games, I'm not really sure. So I didn't want that to be like a barrier to me creating stuff. So I kind of became indecisive about what I wanted to do. And during that time, while I was being indecisive, I happened to be hanging out with a group of friends who happened to be doing computer science, and they were booking tickets to go to this conference called KiwiCon. And I was like, what is KiwiCon? And I had a look at the website, and the tickets were $30. And my friends were organizing a van and like accommodation to go there. And I had a look at the description on the website, and it was just like really entertaining. And it was just like, this kind of con is not like any con you've seen before. There's like no dry talks, there's no like bags of swag or anything. It's like people who are coming to share about like hacks that they've done, and it's really laid back, and the description was hilarious. So I was like, yeah man, I'll totally give this a go. And I went there, and I didn't know anything really about like computer security, and I was sitting there in these talks, and I was just writing down all these terms on my phone, and then after the talks, like asking my friends about it, like, what is a shell? What is a stack? What do these things mean? And I was also really kind of captivated by the type of people that were there, that were they're very knowledgeable, but also very casual in their approach. So they knew so much about so many different things, and you could talk to people for ages about all sorts of different topics. And it was just really cool to be a nerd, and I was like, damn, I want to be a casual nerd who like can talk about all these things and knows the stuff. So I really liked that, and I kept going back every year. And then I went into computer science, and I went in feeling really confident with computers at the start. And then in the end of first year, I was kind of feeling like I was doubting myself, like maybe I don't actually know anything about computers. There's these students in class who will contradict the tutors, and they'll put up their hand and bring up like irrelevant points. And I was like, what's the point in me being here if these people know everything something already. And I read this book, Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing. And it talked about this and how like those people who are, are always correcting like the lecturers and stuff like this are super off-putting to everyone else. And I started talking to some of my classmates and asking them how they were feeling in their courses. And it turns out lots of people were struggling. Lots of people, were dealing with like anxiety and depression and like feeling very isolated, which I thought was like, well, if everyone's feeling this way, maybe there's something I could do. So I threw a barbecue and about like 70 people turned up, which was much better than expected. I was like, oh gosh, students actually like crawled out of the woodworks and turned up for like the free food. And doing that, and in doing that, I created the Computer Science Student Society. And the aim was to, provide a space for people to actually come out and like hang out with each other, rather than just being like stuck in their classes the whole time and then just going home right afterwards. I think part of doing this was a form of resilience in a way. Like I did find, I found my assignments really challenging and I found it really hard, but I didn't quite want to believe that I couldn't do it. And I noticed that there are these environmental problems. I was like, maybe I could do stuff. And suddenly, when you have a really hard problem, it makes other slightly less hard problems seem much easier. So organizing events and stuff seemed so much easier to me at that time. But I got to do really good stuff with that. Like I was a Google Student Ambassador, which is a program that they don't run anymore. And this is me in the front row with these really awesome like Gmail bags. And that was really fun. With that, I organized like events for Google on campus, and also found like another group of students who were also really driven and wanted to make change at their universities who I could talk to. I also heard about Women Tech Makers, which back then it was called Anita Borg Scholarship. And I didn't think that I would be able to apply for this, because this is for women who are doing lots of cool stuff and they've got perfect grades and all this kind of thing. But I got convinced to apply anyway, and I'm really glad that I did, because I made it as a finalist and I got to meet lots of other women who were doing computer science and technology, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing and kind of life-changing, and all of these things helped encourage me to stay in tech despite the challenges. And I kept reminding myself that, I chose this because it's hard, because it challenges me. So even when I was feeling really sad with some assignments, and plus some of them are quite cool to look back on. One of the assignments that I did, I wrote a multitasking kernel in assembly, and that was pretty awesome. But God, it was awful at the time. I also, having been to KiwiCon every year since that first time I went, I was thinking maybe security is important, and maybe this is something that is really, would be really good for students to know about. So I co-founded the Cybersecurity Challenge at my university. There were lots of students, hence many pizzas, and it went really well. And but I still didn't really consider myself a security person yet, or somebody. I didn't even really consider myself interested in security. I was just people should know about it because it seems useful. But then there was one year where I had two conferences right before KiwiCon, and I thought, there's no way that I could make this, because even if I tried my best, I'd miss half the conference. So maybe it's not worth going. And it got to the fifth or sixth person saying to me, so I'll see you at KiwiCon. But I was like, oh man, I'm sick of saying no, that I'm not going to be there. It's God damn, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna go, and you know what? I'm gonna order one of the goddamn hoodies as well, because I feel like I'm part of the family now. And that was a really cool moment for me, just because that was when I kind of recognized that the community that I enjoyed being in actually enjoyed having me in it as well. And then they were also starting to ask me if I was going to submit a talk. And I was like, oh no, I don't know anything about security. I cannot do the security talking. But people kept asking me, they're like, when are you going to start submitting talks? I was like, oh, maybe I can submit a talk on like the history of lockpicking or something. I heard a really cool story about it. Maybe we could do that. So I did this, and I got accepted at KubeCon, and this is from KubeCon 10, and this was in front of like 2,000 people, which was like really, again, like so amazing going from, going there at KubeCon 5 and not knowing anything about security to being in front of 2,000 hackers essentially, which is a little bit nerve-wracking. And then on my Twitter, like all these hackers started following me, and I was like, oh no, this is a bit stressful. I also got a prize for that talk. I got Best Newcomer award, and this is like an etched wood plank thing. And when I got it, one of the organizers was like, "This is you, the spaceship through the sky." I was like, thank you. So then I thought, like, can I do security? Can I be a security person? Is hacking a thing that maybe I can do? And so a way of like, I guess kind of figuring it out, I found a work colleague who, because by this time I had like graduated and I was working as a systems developer for a wholesale fiber optic company in Christchurch, New Zealand. One of them was a tester, this work colleague, and they were really good at noticing weird behavior and raising it and then laughing maniacally at my pain. And I was thinking, this mindset is very familiar. So I basically asked her, I was like, have you heard about hacking? Maybe this is something you might want to do. And people, meanwhile, at the same time as this, people were asking me to submit more talks because they liked my last one. They're like, can you do another one at our conference? And I was like, oh, I don't know if it's relevant. So I kind of combined these two things. And I was like, hey, work colleague, do you want to give a talk? And do you want to learn as much as you can about security for 30 days and then give a talk on it? And then just no matter what happens, like if it turns out badly, then that's fine. We'll just talk about how it was a complete disaster and that you can't learn anything about security in 30 days. Or we could say like how we managed to get through that. So this is a photo from like the day before when we were practicing our talk. This is Catherine at the back, and this is me when I had red hair and I'm kind of blending in through the chairs. And that was also really well received, and she won Best Newcomer award for the talk at that conference, which was pretty cool. And this was like, all these seats were filled as well, so it was like really, really awesome experience. But one of the great things about doing this talk is that, or doing this project with Catherine, is that I realized I knew a huge amount more about security than I thought I did. She didn't have a computer science background, so there was also kind of layers of like, just general computer knowledge as well as security on top of that. And so it also was like kind of a sneaky way for me to kind of actually do deliberate learning on all of the basics, because at this point I'd just been lingering in the community and thinking like, oh, I'm a little bit of a fraud, I'm just kind of hanging out here, like I don't really know anything. So this was like a sneaky way for me to like actually go over the basics, and it had that positive of realizing that, hey, actually I knew a huge amount about this already, just through like going to this conference every year and then just being friends with hackers. And then somewhere around this point, like after that talk I gave at KiwiCon, I'd met Darren Bilby, who gave the keynote there. I met them at the airport afterwards, and we had just a good chat. And he was like, "Hey, we're hiring security engineers. Maybe you want to consider giving it a go." I was like, "Oh no, I don't know anything. Like But he's like, no, I think you really could do it. Like, I think you could give it a go. It's a good role for beginners, people like, starting out and stuff like this. I think maybe you can do it. And so I thought, oh, okay, all right. Well, am I kidding? Of course I'm going to try. So I gave it a go, and at first they were like, oh, like we're still establishing the team, so maybe just like wait 12 months. And I was like, oh, okay. But then a few months later, I got this email saying, would you like to go directly to on-site interviews? To which So what I did is I studied a lot. I had a whiteboard, this is what it looks like. I had like just a bunch of terms and stuff, and I was like, make sure I know about all the details of these things. And I did heaps of practice interviews with some friends, just because it's like really nerve-wracking when people are asking you questions about stuff that you don't know anything about. So I really wanted to be able to cope in that situation. So what I did is I asked my friends who had been in like the industry for like 10 to 15 years, and I said, please ask me questions like about technical subjects. Don't check if I know it first. Just ask me. Just see how we go. Just ask me questions. And so that's the way that I kind of practiced, is being in a space where I didn't know, like being in a space where I could just genuinely practice working through a concept or a situation, and learning to ask questions and go through like my thought process. And then after many interviews, including practice interviews, I got the job. Oh my God, wow. And I was so like, didn't really know how to, I was very excited about this and I wasn't quite sure. I actually, fun little fact is, when I knew I was going to get the call from the recruiter, I wasn't sure how it was going to go, so I made 2 playlists on Spotify, and one of them was called just flame emoji, and the other one was called shit luck. And then like last minute in the morning, because I couldn't sleep, and the recruiter happens to be in like New York, which is like time zone wise kind of tricky, I made like another playlist called Shit Luck for Prize, which had like just pure sadness. And I was so excited when the recruiter was like, oh, you made it through. I told her about the playlist and she's like, send them to me. She's like, I've never had that one before. So I was like, okay, here you go. Anyway, I also asked my friend to make like, I was like, I don't know how to tell people. Maybe I should like put up an image of like Google with like my face on it or something. And they came up with this. Which is awesome. And I like had this whole post about like getting, accepted into the school of like cybercraft and search queries and like and all this kind of stuff. And so it was really fun. So anyway, what do I do now that I'm here? What do I do at Google? So I'm on the detection and response team. This is like our logo for our organization. And look, I'm going to talk a little bit about our pipeline. So what we do is we get lots of logs, and then we process them to make them look roughly the same, and we store them, and then we do some like extra work to make them look good, and then we have a look at it. So what I'm doing is I'm on the security surveillance team. We're looking at detecting if hackers are on the network, and then if they are, if it looks really bad, then we escalate it to incident management or digital forensics, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And so what we kind of do is we're like managing heaps of data all the time. So this is coming from like hundreds of thousands of computers, doing like, just doing great, most of the time it's like developers doing really weird stuff. It turns out people at Google do lots of strange stuff all the time. So it's kind of hard to tell if it's like an attacker doing bad stuff or if it's a Googler just doing their job. And this kind of like spits out into events at the end of this processing, and then we look at it. So a lot of this process is actually automated. So if I give you like an example, so say like antivirus notices something on like a Googler's computer. What we do is we have like the antivirus alert. We know that it executed. We have a copy of the binary that it ran. We know what was going on with the user at the time, like where they were. We know whether the machine was patched or not. We have information about the machine as well. And this data, like, it's all grouped together into this nice little package. And then, like, my job is to go through and check all those things. And it's like, okay, is this like a known bad thing? Yes, no, and kind of like triage it, and then make decisions based on that. And so by doing, so that's like essentially one part of my job is like checking those events. The other part is doing the automation. So doing that thing where we're like, oh, we want to know if a binary is executed, and we want to know if antivirus detected it and all that kind of stuff. So somebody goes through and puts that together, and then that turns into like an automated detection, essentially. So this is kind of what our teams look like. So we have a threat analyst group, and what they do is they might have a look at what are the threats, who's trying to attack Google, and we have security monitoring tools which a team builds for us, and we're often involved quite heavily in the development of those two. And then we get information from these things, from this group and through these tools, and then we have a look, we kind of essentially triage them. We also actively hunt for stuff, so not everything, as I said, not everything makes it in front of us. So part of our job is also to actively look to see if there's stuff going on that we're missing through our automation. And then we escalate to either digital forensics, and what they'll do is they'll like grab the machine where that binary was executed and go through and be like, how did it end up on this machine? What was it trying to do? Was it trying to contact like a C2 server somewhere? And then they'll get information like what's going on with that server? Is that doing bad stuff? And through their investigation, they decide if it should be escalated to incident management or not, or if they can like resolve it essentially. So these are all different kinds of security teams that we have at Google, which require like slightly different skill set, but it also means that like when you get bored of like one job after like 5 years, you could move to another one. So there's lots of options or like pathways within a security career at Google, which is pretty awesome. We also do offensive security. This photo is actually taken from, I think it was Hyven? Yeah, they were like sick of seeing like the bad security stuff photos, and so they decided to take their own, which they're pretty funny, there's like a whole bunch of them. Anyway, so we actually do our own like internal red teaming. We will do, we have security assessment teams that will look at, when a product launches, what are the security like holes that we need to patch? Is it going to be like safe out there in the world? And we also do a thing where blue team or people who are on defense, they'll do like occasional exercises where they will act as red teamers, and they will go and like test our readiness for an attack. So even if you're on blue team at Google, there are opportunities to do like offensive security, and knowledge of offensive security is really important. So this could be your future. One of these teams that I've just described, like inevitably it will change over time as security changes over time. But security at Google is only growing at the moment, and it's like growing by a lot, right? So this is something to think about, like down the line. Currently, we don't do security engineering internships. Maybe down the line we're not really sure. It kind of depends because we deal with a lot of sensitive information. But this is something that you can kind of think about, like looking back on, I guess, my journey to Google. I was kind of like a little bit involved with Google, being like a Google student ambassador and doing like women tech makers and stuff like this. And I was a little bit involved with like QtCon, and that journey kind of spanned out over like 6 years or so, 6 to 8 years. So, it's something that's, you kind of like can chip away at it. It's not necessarily like, you decide and then you're there. I have some tips. Go to hacker conferences. Maybe I'm a bit biased because I really like them. There's lots of InfoSec people on Twitter, surprisingly enough. I don't know why they decided that Twitter was the cool thing to do, but they did. reading books is great, and trying CTFs. So trying like cybersecurity challenges and stuff like that. There's challenges online. Like I personally find it really daunting being in like a huge room with all these hackers everywhere, like on their computers drinking like coffee or beer or whatever. And so I don't really like those environments, but there's some online like learnctf.com, which has like really small challenges that are good for beginners, and you can find somebody who maybe you know in the security community, or you can jump into like a chat room somewhere and ask for help. And that's like a really awesome way to like learn and also connect with other people in security. Doing coding projects, like just regular coding projects or security related projects is pretty good too. I really enjoyed the book called Violent Python, which was about like doing Python but for like hacking and forensics and stuff, and that was really cool and had like small scripts. So even if you are like, you know, have a look and code up some of these things yourself and you can put them on GitHub, I guess just be careful, maybe put some disclaimers, like don't do bad things. I feel like you should have known this. And it's fine to include all of this on your CV because it shows, like, even if it doesn't feel like, you know, you've done some big project or you've worked as a security person before, it can be kind of hard to get into security. So, like, noticing the ways in which you kind of show your passion, like by engaging with these things, is important too. Like, just including the conferences that you've been to and that kind of thing shows that you're actively learning about security. And yeah, again, like think long term about where you'd like to go, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's it for me. Did you have any questions? Yes?
You use honeypots at Google?
Sort of, like we have different ways of doing detections and stuff like that.
Okay. Examples?
Sorry?
I just wanted to test physical security, but also did try and like, I guess, illegally get your way into your offices.
Yeah, so I believe that we do. We do look for this kind of stuff. We have people who are like, I think during your Noogler training, they showed a video of like people like sneaking into the office because they test to see how many, like if you hold a cup of coffee or like 2 cups of coffee, how easily do you get into the office? And they like see who, you know, checks the badges and see who just lets them in and just to work. Like we don't name and shame people, but we do kind of raise awareness. So we do have like things like that where we do try and test physical security. I'm also hosting a tamper seal challenge at OzSecCon soon. That's like in 3 weeks, I think, where we're wanting to test out different tamper seals and kind of understand a little bit more about the physical security of like your devices. And we have like this idea that you know, putting like nail polish on your screws on your computer seems to be like the glitter nail polish because it will, like the liquid will sit in a way that's like random, like it's got really good like entropy rate. So we're like, oh, maybe if we can use this as a way of detecting people. So that's one of the challenges at our, that's like the hardest challenge on our tamper seal workshop challenge thing that we're doing. So there are things that we do with that, like so yeah, essentially we are interested in like the different aspects of that. Answer your question?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You said you were really into lock picking, but that never helped with getting into security. You never bring up lock picking, everyone's like, ah, nice.
Yeah, sort of. So it turns out there's like in my talk that I did, I made a lot of kind of analogies to like physical security and digital security, particularly around mindset. There's definitely a lot of overlaps there. But yeah, there's like a huge like lockpicking community, particularly I think in Australia and New Zealand. Like if you go to the hackathons, there's always like a group of people who are have, you know, a bunch of blocks and they'll just be sitting around like picking locks all day. And they're usually like, a bunch of them are hackers as well, so you just sit down and talk to them. So like in a way, you kind of like it helps in that sense, if that makes sense. Yeah.
How friendly would you say the hackathons are to people who are kind of getting into it versus those who actually know some stuff? I mean, you talked about the ones in New Zealand, but what's your experience been since then with various different ones?
Yeah, that's like a really good, that's a good question. So I felt pretty welcomed. I mostly kind of stuck to my friends and I talked to a few people out there, but when I said that I was new and like wanting to learn more, people were super helpful. And actually, I feel like it almost becomes more of a problem when you start knowing stuff and then people like keep explaining it to you, and you're like, oh, actually, I know things now. So I think as a beginner, that I found the community to be really welcoming. And that's the same for, there's a lot of overlap between like Australia and New Zealand security community. They often go to each other's conferences and stuff. So yeah, I have had like a good experience. And especially for KiwiCon that does have like a good code of conduct that they enforce and stuff as well. I feel like much more confident, like encouraging other women, for example, to go along, because I know that it's going to be like, much safer there. Say as a counter example, like DEFCON, where it seems like a little bit like cowboys everywhere, and yeah. So it does depend on like the conference, and it's kind of good to like talk to people and see what's going to be cool. But yeah, typically in Australia and New Zealand, people are really good.
Is it true that to be accepted for a security career, you generally need to have had a few years of industry experience? I've asked around, but I've never had the chance to hear from a security engineer.
Right, so I didn't actually have industry experience going into this role. Other than just kind of like knowing some people and hanging out with security folk, on the application it said like 5 to 8 years experience required. So, and when Darren was telling me about this, he was like, just don't pay attention to that part, don't even look at it. And I looked and I was like, oh my god. So I think that like, it really depends. I mean, when I first joined, they were actually just establishing the team in Sydney, so I think like you want kind of more experienced people at the start when you're just starting something. But now it's like pretty well established in Sydney, so we're open to bringing in people who are like you. So
yeah, we're
this
hiring.
is Chris, by the way, my manager.
Go ahead. I'm a hiring manager at Google, and I'm hiring for the security engineering team right now. So we do look at people without engineering, like security engineering industry experience. We look at people that have. In that case, if they haven't done security engineering experience, we're really interested in people that have done any software engineering, because half of what our job does is software engineering. So anyone that's done like internships in software engineering, it's a really good hiring pool that we look at.
Mm-hmm.
So not necessarily industry experience, but sometimes just internships at like the top tech companies like Atlassian and Google.
Mm-hmm.
How different is like interviews for security roles compared to maybe like a software engineering?
They're quite different. So security engineering at Google has some elements of coding. Usually the coding questions are much shorter and they don't go in as in depth, and they basically just want to know that you have coding experience. Turns out there's a lot of security people who don't know how to code at all. Or the most they've done is writing kind of like dirty Python scripts that will just kind of get them to where they need to go, sort of thing. So there is an element of that, but for the most part, what the interviews will be like, we got these logs, and they'll like show you examples of like some logs, and they're like, is this good or bad? What's happening in here? And then you work your way through. Some of them are like a discussion, like what would you do in this sort of like situation where somebody's computer is left open, like what kind of information would you get from there, or like I don't know that, and you kind of do like a back and forth. I found that interviews like actually pretty fun. Like once I kind of felt comfortable talking about what I know. It was almost like a text-based adventure game. Like they'd tell you the scenario and they'd be like, what would you do? And I'd be like, I would check this place and have a look here, and I would also have a look at this thing. And they'd be like, okay, so you found out this, and this. What would you do now? And I'd be like, okay, with this new information, I would check these things and have a look at these logs. And then at the end, they were like, so would you try and like kick the attacker off the network, or would you not in this case? And we're like, oh, I don't know, maybe phone a friend, or I would, check. I don't think we have enough information, so maybe we'll just like, try and learn a little bit more before taking any like hard actions.
So you're trying to understand the thinking process.
Right, exactly. So it's like about like what you observe and how you work through problems, and just seeing like, you know, kind of your, like, I guess it's like breadth and depth of knowledge is kind of important, which is why it is kind of hard to do security engineering interviews. So it also kind of checks for that as well, like what kind of technologies are you familiar with and what places are you not? And if you're not familiar with something, how do you work through that? How do you find the information that you need to do?
What are the most important technical knowledge that you find useful in your work?
Good question. I think like, I guess knowledge of like a bit of networking, a bit of like common vulnerabilities, knowledge of like, I don't know, like different kind of, even just like different kind of social engineering or like physical attacks that people might do on a machine is quite useful. And looking at like reverse engineering of like malware and like, you know, some of the popular malware, I don't know if you want to call it popular, malware that's out there. So I don't know, I kind of like, what I did is, if you saw my whiteboard, every time I came across something that I was even just a little bit unsure about, I just put it on a post-it note on there and then I like reviewed it. And if I came across new terms or, I also talked to some people, like I have a friend of mine who's really into malware reverse engineering. So I went and talked to them and I was like, hey, teach me about the things. And so they're like, okay, this is what I usually do when, you know, we find this new like sample of some kind of like bad malicious binary. And they would also like, I don't know, mention other kinds of attacks, and like through there I might discover like some sort of area of security that I'd forgotten about, and then go into and just put it on a post-it and be like, all right, that's another thing to look into. So I kind of let it be like a very sprawling net of knowledge. So yeah, just kind of, and yeah, going over like protocols is like pretty useful. I don't know if that kind of answers the question. Yeah.
What skills do you think are lacking in the security community at the moment, and what skills are going to be needed for the next couple of years? Like, what should people learn?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like coding is really important, being able to build your own tools, particularly, I guess it's at Google, right, we have so much data, so we need, like automation is a really important aspect of that. Communication is hugely important, and I think that this is something that, you know, some people in security like value, like a lot of, I feel like the infosec industry is communicating ideas and communicating knowledge and sharing like, you know, new ways of like attacking stuff, and communicating that in the right way is super important, because that can mean the difference between a lawsuit and like somebody patching your bug, right? So, so I think that that's something that's becoming ever more important. Like one of the things that I really liked about Darren's keynote at KiwiCon was he talked about us, like security people needing to be more responsible as security engineers, as in, you know, when we tell people like don't click on links, don't open attachments, like those, that's what they're there for. Like links are meant for clicking. So we need to do a better job of making links safe to click rather than blaming the user, right? And so this is like, I think, a mindset that is really valuable for security engineers to have. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's a good answer. I think coding and communicating and being more responsible, like you said, like people are always going to click links, right? We need to be able to engineer our systems so that we're resilient to people clicking links.
Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
So we noticed before that Google is more interested in people who have like good track record discovering bugs in Google's products. So participating in bug bounties, we've seen like people getting employed by Google. So does that mean like also people looking at any people participating in other bug bounties, other programs, not necessarily Google ones? Does that count as like, okay, this is...
Yeah, I think that counts as like passion for security and like wanting and responsible disclosure and stuff. Like I feel like it doesn't have to be for Google bug bounties. Like you have Bug Crowd, for example. Like if you're active on there, like that's really cool too. I think that kind of comes under general like security experience. So we're not looking specifically for people's like involvement in Google, if that answers your question.
Just want to ask, have there ever been any incidents where employees have done unethical things on the job? And to add on to that, do you perform any like background checks during the process?
I mean, I think you'll find for any job or most jobs, they'll do a background check, right? So we're not the only company that does that. And yeah, you're right. Like Google is like a really big company. So that is something that we're concerned about. If you're willing to move to New York, we have like an insiders task force if you want to like apply for SST in New York. So that's like something that, yeah, like it's, something that we do need to consider, right? Because it turns out that, most leaks of information are going to come from within a company. So, but yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, it's something that, can come up, but like, we really do like genuinely believe in like Googlers, and we want it, where most of our job is like keeping Googlers safe from like the bad stuff that's out there, or like, saving them when they do click on a bad link and install malware and that kind of stuff. Like most of the time we're there to try and like protect people. We're not like adversarial or anything like that. So I hope that was like an okay answer.
I mean, I would probably add that Grace sort of mentioned that we have an insider risk team that does focus specifically on this kind of threat. And they are the largest team amongst all the DNR teams. They have the most security engineers because it is such a big problem. They, I guess their focus is in protecting your data, pretty much. Like, so our user data is our biggest like asset at Google, and we have the utmost respect for everybody's privacy. So we put the largest amount of resources in protecting that data from ourselves, basically, from our own internal risks. And so I guess that's pretty much what I would add to that.
Yeah.
So there was a talk in B-side that touched on how formal verification can like make sure a system is like completely safe mathematically. So do you think that would change, like as that gets more common or like easier to do? Do you think that would change the security
Like landscape
in any way? Things like Data61 is working on and stuff like that. Is it going to make like pen testing redundant?
I don't know.
No, because like you can formally verify hermetic systems, right? So they cannot have side effects and they cannot have inputs and outputs, essentially. So those systems are useless, right? So we can we have hermetic like systems. We run lots of tests, like hermetic tests on our systems, and we can probably mathematically verify, given our hermetic inputs and outputs, the systems are formally verified to be risk-free in the context of that formal verification. But as soon as you go and add user data to that, it completely invalidates the premise, right? So we don't approach the problem from a formal verification angle. We approach it from using safer programming language to begin with, like systems that don't have memory unsafety, systems that are strongly typed, and have other ways to defend themselves, right? We think that formal verification is a really great application of computer science and math, but it's not a way to provide useful services to the world. Like we've got to provide services for billions and billions of people. Like formal verification of those systems would be very difficult at scale.
So just picking up on the question regarding the insider threat and what you mentioned of automation detection. So do you have like behavioral patterns like for your employees, like saying, okay, this behavior falls into these guys, this behavior falls into these guys, and if they if you detect any anomaly, then you say, okay, this might be malicious activity, or what do you exactly rely on?
Right. So there is like some of that to some extent. However, like anomaly detection is really, really hard to do right and get like, because it generates a lot of false positives. And that's like can be quite costly for engineers to go through and verify. But it's something that we're really interested in doing more of, and maybe using like things like machine learning and stuff like this to try and help us be able to do that more of like kind of behavioral detections and stuff. But yeah, as I said, like turns out Googlers do weird stuff all the time, so it can be like really difficult to try and gauge what unusual behavior is. Yeah.
I don't know if you can disclose, but like, what kind of behavior crosses over between weird Googlers and malicious?
Oh, so I guess like, so say somebody is wanting to like, I don't know, develop some kind of like SSH or like kernel level thing or something like that. Most people probably aren't working in that space. So if we see that on somebody's machine, then we think like, this could be bad. But like, it could also be like you just check what their job role is, and then it's like, oh, they're doing like kernel development, and you're like, oh, no wonder they're like firing all these signals, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we found the guys that developed the kernel address sanitizer, like KSAN and KTSAN and AMSAN and stuff like that. They're doing some weird things with kernel, like fuzzing all the syscalls in the Linux FreeBSD and like commissioner kernels. And that's pretty weird when you find that.
Yeah.
We don't really know how to react. So why are you doing this on your corporate machine?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you do get sort of strange stuff. Yeah.
What are you most proud of since working at Google? Like what either you or part of the team you work on can be proud of?
I don't know. Okay. So I haven't been there for that long. Like I just passed like my 6-month mark. And one of my first projects that I got, which was to try and detect a certain kind of attack that a certain group of attackers have been known to use. And like, so you're like, okay, this is interesting, that's cool. Like, let me like do some research. And I was like, oh, research, that's kind of hard, do more research. I'm not really getting anywhere with this, do some more research. And then eventually kind of figured out that it's not actually like feasible to detect that because like we don't have the right information and the logs of that, and the whole system is designed in such a way that you cannot try and like, you cannot detect a certain type of attack that a skilled attacker, or even like a reasonably good attacker could do, like there's not much room for error, like there's not many ways where they could like kind of mess up. And so that was really hard. Like I definitely had a moment where I was like, man, why is there nothing good about this on the internet really? And then I had this moment of like, oh, a Google engineer is looking at it, like, they've done kind of hard problems before, so maybe this is why a Google engineer is looking at this problem. So I guess kind of working through that and then being able to do like really thorough analysis and then coming to a conclusion and saying like, actually, no, this is not something we can do. Pretty kind of proud moment for like a Googler, right, who's kind of like just figuring things out. So yeah, it's probably like my proudest moment so far.
I hear this term that like security is like a very person problem, as like if you understand how like a developer's thinking, it's easy to break into systems, like if they name all the domains after Skyrim references. Do you think do you think that's really useful for you to think about and read up on like sort of how human behavior and developer behavior works?
Yeah, I think it is useful, to be honest. Like, but maybe I'm a little bit biased in this way because it's something that I'm genuinely interested in. For example, I really like the book Thinking Fast and Slow, which is all about like how you take shortcuts in your mind and all these different biases that you have, and you can only really focus on like hard problems for like a short amount of time, and there's only so much effort you can exert in a given moment. And I think, yeah, knowing behavior and also just knowing how our brains are kind of functioning normally, I think does help. Because you, at least for empathy, it means that when you are looking at an application where some people have made some mistakes or whatever, you're like, oh, they probably just didn't think about it. They probably just didn't know, So it's really good for like empathy building, and empathy is useful if you're wanting to do an attack. Like for example, a friend of mine did this project where they hacked their friend for fun. And but their friend consented and everything, so it was like, hey, and they did like a blog post about it at the end, and they had like a talk about it. And one of the things that they did is they ended up like phishing their friend, and their friend used this password, but turns out they'd like recently changed it, so they put in like the old password for their account, which didn't work for their emails currently, and so he was like, oh, okay, so this person actually thinks their old password is their current password, or they just don't know what their password is. So when he was like talking to me about this, I was like, oh, maybe, you know, like if I'm not sure what my password is, I just like type in like a whole bunch until you get one that's gonna work. And I've seen like a friend of mine do this one time. They got locked out of their bank account because they just tried like 10 different passwords and they couldn't remember what their password was. And so I was like, how about you like have a, you know, try and push them again, but like just reject the first 2 attempts, just no matter what the password is, just reject the first 2 attempts. And that way you get 3 passwords, probably. And they did, and they were able to like get the correct password for the email from that. So this is a problem with people using, like actually remembering the passwords and doing password rotation, as opposed to using like a password manager or stuff like this. So yeah, that was like, I guess something that, you know, we kind of came up with, thinking like, how do people usually act around these things? Like, how certain are people that they've typed in their password like correctly? Yeah. So anyway,
That this connects to that point, but internally, like on the human side of things, how do you deal with like people who forget their passwords and stuff?
Who? Sorry, what do what?
They forget their passwords. But if that's a relevant thing.
So let me summarize. So you're kind of like asking about like, is it a problem if people forget their passwords and stuff? I mean, like, not really. You should be able to change your password easily, I believe. And I think that's really important for if there is a breach, and if you have reused a password, you should be able to go to the different sites and like change your password really easily. I think that you know, maybe a lot of like power is put into passwords when perhaps they shouldn't be. I don't know if you have like multi-factor authentication and stuff like this, or even using like security keys. A really good way of kind of like reducing the power that your password has, you know, and that kind of helps prevent phishing attacks and stuff like that. So passwords are kind of like a bit of a pain. Maybe one day we won't have them anymore, and maybe that will be better for everyone. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know if they can.
Google sign-ins for everything.
Sorry?
Google sign-in for literally everything.
Oh yeah, look. It's also a really good way to consolidate power into one account, which can also be maybe like.
Be very difficult when you want to delete a Facebook account.
Yeah. It's true. So that can carry with its own set of problems, I guess. Anything else?
Was the friend who did the password thing, was that the guy who...
The Mango PDF, yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Alex, yeah. Yeah, good friend of mine. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you ever in your entire career in like security actually like looked up from a computer and said, I'm in?
All the time, like, you know, there's so many good opportunities where you can say like hacker voice, I'm in. Just even say the first part, hacker voice. Yeah. Yeah, we made like a lot of jokes, and you saw that in the image as well. Yeah, oh my god, OCD is, no, usually I'm so mad that I'm just like, got a shell, don't even care, I'm so angry. I don't know if you guys know what OCD is. It's like an offensive security cost thing, and like if you're allowed and you learn how to hack stuff, yeah. Doing that at the moment is painful.
Would you say like a lot of the other people working on your team have kind of halfway like interesting ways that they arrived at their job?
Yeah, people do have different ways of getting in. Like, so I know like one of my work colleagues who's super, super good, they dropped out of uni and then like ended up, they went to KiwiCon too as well. And I don't know, they were doing like the CTF challenge and they met a couple of people there and they're like, yeah, let's just sit down and work through some of these challenges together. And he kind of got into it through that way. It was like, well, this thing's really cool, and then kept going, and then ended up like working at a security firm and stuff like this. I know another friend of mine who doesn't work at Google, but they work at a like pen testing red team company in Melbourne. They did history in their degree, and they worked at ThoughtWorks for a while. They were able to get, because ThoughtWorks kind of looks at like logic and how you process stuff, and so they got involved doing like development that way, and now they're working as like a pen tester and stuff, so that's kind of cool. Even like my Chris's manager, my manager's manager, used to do like marine biology, and then they ended up working, I think it's like a sysadmin.
Yeah, she was sysadmin at like some Comcast or something.
Yeah, and then I think maybe they got hacked and then she got interested in security through that. So, if I recall the story right. So yeah, people kind of do get into it in different ways. Yeah, there's another person who did like they did like a PhD in like VoIP security stuff, so that's kind of more academic way of getting in. Yeah, so I think like, and I know for another one of my colleagues, they also got hacked and that's how they got interested in security. I got interested because I was really terrified of being hacked. And I don't know, I feel like it's kind of useful to confront the things that you're afraid of, and so that's why I quite like security, because yes, it's scary and my data is important. So rather than shying away from it and just pretending like, oh, I just won't look if anything bad happens, I decided actually it's better to spend more time. And also like, this is kind of like a side point, the security stories are awesome. Like I love the stories that you hear in security profession. Like I think that's probably like what really kept me in it, is that you always hear these, particularly for like red teaming or like different, when people tell the story of like how they hacked something, like how Alex like hacked their friend and stuff like this, and telling that as a story I think is really interesting. So it's very kind of tangent from your original question. Yeah.
What's the culture like in your team? Like, is it pretty laid back?
In our team? Yeah.
And it feels like an interesting project you want to work on, be able to do things like that, or is it pretty like cutthroat where you're just like expected to on the outline?
Yeah, so I would say like the culture's kind of interesting. So because we're the security surveillance team, we're kind of watching all the time. So our team is actually split into two halves. So one side of the team works Sunday to Wednesday, and the other side works like Wednesday to Saturday. And these are shifts that they may change, but this is kind of how it's set up at the moment. So the culture's kind of different on each side, but I would say like in Sydney, it's like pretty relaxed. And I think in the US, where we also have our team, it's a little bit more stressful for them because, you know, there's just a lot going on there, right? So they're more likely to get interrupted. So yeah, I think like, I think the general kind of like vibe is pretty good. There's a lot of work to do all the time, but you know, we do really care about work-life balance and making sure that people stop at like actually go home and like don't work on their weekends and stuff. We kind of try to be reasonably strict about that. In terms of like project flexibility, you're basically required to have an area that you're interested in, just because like, even though our team is very specialized, within that, it's still very broad, so you have to specialize even more. So for example, I work on looking at our corporate machines, so like the machines that Google has used, but there's other people like we mentioned before, like the insider risk group, they kind of focus on that sort of area. So you do get to specialize. You also get like 20% time where you can work on like whatever kind of stuff that you're interested in. I'm also doing like a kind of like a side project with a team that works on building some of our tools that we use. So there is like flexibility in that way, and people's like individual interests are generally like encouraged and supported. So.
Do you find yourself interacting much with most of the other teams, whatever they do at Google, or is it all like contained within the security?
It kind of depends. So for me personally, I'm quite social, so I talk to other teams and what they're doing. But for other people, it might be a little bit more contained. We have 2 security teams in Sydney. We have platform protection and us. But we socialize with them quite a lot. And we also work quite closely with like incident management and like digital forensics and stuff.